Dragi prijatelji glazbe, velika mi je čast predstaviti vam maestra Andrása Schiffa, mog dugogodišnjeg prijatelja. Imam čast da ga zovem prijatelj, mi se poznamo već dugi niz godina, nastupali smo zajedno. Obratio bih vam se prvo sa par riječi i onda bih vas zamolio za razumijevanje ako ostatak razgovora povedemo na engleskom jeziku, ja ću onda samo kratko siže prevesti. So, dear András, thank you for this wonderful recital. It's been a pleasure and a joy to listen to you. And as I mentioned, it's been fantastic how you created what an intimate atmosphere in this big hall. And thank you for your kind words about our audience in Zagreb, because it's not always the case that they are so attentive and so concentrated. So thank you to the audience and thank you to you. My first question would have been about the instrument, and you already mentioned in a few words what kind of an instrument. As I walked into the concert hall tonight with a friend of mine who's a theater director, he said, "Wow, what's this? What kind of instrument is this?" He already mentioned. I'd like to extend the question maybe because I remember you talking about your experiences on old instruments. You talked about the clavichord when playing Bach. You had the chance and opportunity to play on Mozart's own keyboard instrument in Salzburg, and you mentioned how it's actually impossible to force on that. So I would like to maybe ask you generally about your experience of having played old instruments, old keyboard instruments, and how to transfer this kind of music into large spaces like this concert hall on a modern instrument, and your thought, if you would share that with us. Thank you.
So first of all, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. You were a wonderful audience, very, very inspiring. Instruments, yes. We live today in a globalization, globalized world. When people think of piano, it is almost always a Steinway piano, wherever you go. So this is a monopoly. Steinway, when it's good, is a very good piano, but it's not the only piano, and it's not equally good for all music. Schubert is the prime example. I mean, I mentioned the metaphor of the language, but it's more than a metaphor, because music is a language. So I think the language and the music are connected. And Schubert, for example, he didn't speak English, not a word. He didn't speak French. I mean, he probably spoke Latin because that was part of the education. So you need to find the right sound for each composer and for each piece. And of course, it's possible to use one instrument, but if you have the opportunity to have variety, then it's really very good. And my experience with the old instruments is invaluable. When I was young, living in Budapest, then I had the opportunity to play on Broadwood piano owned by Beethoven. It is in the National Museum in Budapest. Unfortunately, it was in very bad condition. And I was young and stupid, and I thought, oh, all the instruments are not very good. And later, when you mentioned Salzburg, came to live in Salzburg, and you know Salzburg as well as I do, or better. So there is this Anton Walter forte piano in the house where Mozart was born. And I had the opportunity to play there and record in the very room where he was born. This is a goose pimple experience. And the instrument was in perfect condition. So that was for me a Saulus Paulus moment. It turned me around. And then I started to look for opportunities to play on instruments from Haydn's, from Beethoven's for Schubert's time in beautiful condition, and you can find these instruments. So it completely changes your way to understand the music, to interpret the music, and you can translate it onto a modern piano, because I cannot play the clavichord in a hall with 2,000 people. I play the clavichord at home. I am alone in the room, and maybe there is one listener. That's it. But it teaches me something about the transparency and the clarity of the music, so I translate it onto the piano.
Thank you. I very much recommend András's book here, Music Comes Out of Silence. It's a wonderful book with many, many insights talking about his musical experience and otherwise. And I was reading through this, and you mentioned that specifically talking about Bach, it's senza pedale, ma con tanti colori. So without pedal, but with many, many colors. Have you been probably influenced by people like George Malcolm and other teachers? Could you tell us a little bit about your education and the people like Kurtag or Ferenc Rados who have influenced you, I'm sure.
I've been very lucky all my life to have had the most wonderful teachers in Budapest, you mentioned, but from very early on, I started with 5 years. I had Elizabeth Vadas was my first teacher for 8 years. But I was not a wunderkind, thank God. I had a normal childhood. I played more football than piano, but not anymore.
I'm sure there are many pianists here, also young. Can we have a look? How many pianists have we got here tonight? Please raise a hand if you play piano. There we go. Quite a crowd, quite a crowd. So, talking about piano specifically, you mention in the book also that you sometimes lack reverence or devotion or truthfulness in following the text of the composer by not following the facsimile. Could you tell us a little bit about that? What you see in young pianists, because I know that you do promote some of your young pianist colleagues and friends, and what is lacking, perhaps?
Look, first of all, we are not creators, but recreators. So the composer is much more important than we are. But we are not totally unimportant, because with the music needs to be played, the music needs to be heard. It's not even a beautiful manuscript of Bach, you can frame it and hang it on the wall. You can look at it, and it's really beautiful. I would encourage everybody to look at composers' handwriting, because it tells you about the character of the person and the character of the music. Beethoven, for example, has a lot of manuscripts which are very turbulent and stormy and full of cricks, and corrections. And then he has other scores which are beautifully harmonious when he was in that mood, the last violin sonata or F-sharp major piano sonata. So it's and on the other hand, Mozart has a reputation that music just flew out of his mind and he never had any difficulty. This is a misconception. There are, when Mozart was writing 6 string quartets dedicated to Haydn, that was a huge undertaking for him, and it took a long time, and there are many corrections. But to interpret music, is a great responsibility, and I can compare it to real life. That we talk a lot today about human rights. What is your right? What is my right? But we don't talk about our obligations. We also have a duty, you know. So you have what Pablo Casals said, you have freedom with order. If there is no order, you have anarchy. So it is my obligation to follow what Beethoven wrote. If Beethoven wrote crescendo, I don't have the right to play diminuendo. If he puts a sforzando, and again, Beethoven insists, one more sforzando, and again, and so then it's a huge mistake of a performer to smoothen that, to iron it out, and etc. So we have to go back to the source. If possible, look at the manuscript. If there are also very good facsimile editions now, and also make sure, and that's the teacher's duty. Just a minute ago, young lady asked me, if you play Bach, what edition should you use? I mean, there are very good editions now for Bach, 5 or 6 or 10 Urtext editions, and there are some terrible editions from the 19th century. The worst is by Karl Czerny. I hate Czerny because of his etudes and all that. And okay, maybe he was the most important pupil of Beethoven. But he puts in the Bach, in das wohltemperierte Klavier, it's full of crescendo, decrescendo, forte, piano, pedal, metronome marks, you know. The metronome was not even invented when Bach lived. So you have to avoid the bad editions, really. It's not necessary anymore. And then when you get the right source and information, then you have a lot of liberties within that framework. You can play a fugue of Bach in 10 different tempi. You choose a tempo, then you have to stick to that. But it can be really convincing. So that is our liberty.
Thank you very much. I remember one particular conversation where you called Beethoven as a composer, you called him your hero. And I'm aware of the fact that you waited rather long until you dared play the whole cycle of 32 piano sonatas. And you performed with great success and recorded it and so on. Could you maybe share your thoughts on choice of repertoire for young pianists? I remember how you described that Bach himself built it up from a young age and so on. But it would probably encounter young pianists who play repertoire which you would not agree with. It might be too demanding for them, either technically or just emotionally on a different level. So could you please tell us how to make good and wise, sane choices for young players?
Well, one shouldn't generalize, but the piano repertoire is huge. And I mean, if you play the horn like you do, wonderfully, really, and you cannot afford to say, you know, I don't play this or I don't play that, because the repertoire is, so I wouldn't say limited, but whatever there is, a good horn player plays everything. Now, with the piano, you have to be more selective and more self-critical. And I am very self-critical, so there are certain composers I don't play because they are physically not suited to me, and I don't like them. For example, Liszt, who is a very great composer, probably the greatest pianist ever. But I don't like him, I'm sorry. Rachmaninov, when I hear, he is as a pianist, maybe one of my favorite. His playing is absolutely wonderful, but I cannot stand the music. I really cannot. But please, so if you like Liszt or Rachmaninoff, then please listen to it and play it, but leave me alone. So, it's not obligatory.
I didn't dare pose the question about Liszt. But talking about enlarging the repertoire, I know that you were not only satisfied with piano repertoire, but you ventured also into orchestra repertoire. And I was privileged to play in your own orchestra, which is called the Andrea Barca, Capella Andrea Barca. And this is, of course, the Italianized version of András Schiff's name, Andrea Barca, András Schiff. And we played cycles of Mozart concertos in Salzburg and many other. You also did some opera. So could you tell us about how it feels to stand in front of the orchestra compared to the piano? You are one of the most colorful pianists that I know. You managed to find the orchestral colors in your playing. But how do you feel? How does this approach change when you all of a sudden become the conductor or the leader, or you direct from the keyboard?
It doesn't change at all. And look, I started to conduct out of curiosity, but I am not a conductor. Oh no, I'm a musician who conducts, but because it interests me, and I learned so much from it. I mean, also, I played all the orchestral scores on the piano, but it doesn't satisfy me. And the whole thing, I'm still, after many decades, I'm intrigued by the phenomenon of what does actually a conductor do.
It's almost metaphysical.
Well, it's a little bit like I hate to be profane, but in football, when you ask, what is the trainer doing? Because he's actually not playing. The players are doing everything. But it seems to make a huge difference psychologically. And maybe the same, the conductor doesn't play a single note. And I still think that with all the admiration I have for certain conductors, mostly of the past, but I think that the position, I mean, we have this heroic image of the conductor. We say, oh, maestro's interpretation of Beethoven, maestro's interpretation. I mean, he hasn't played a single note. I mean, if you cannot play the horn, I mean, it doesn't matter what he is doing, no? But still, the conductor is there, and in the end, orchestras often say, "Oh, we don't need the conductor. We know better. We can play this alone." Okay, try. It will be a disaster. Because there is no democracy in music. Also in a score, when I teach, I tell my students, don't play democratically, because it's like George Orwell's Animal Farm. Some notes are more important than others. Every note is important, but it's not. And in an orchestra, if you would make what is a Volksabstimmung, a referendum, ask 100 people what is the right tempo of the first movement of the Eroica, and you will have 100 opinions. So for that you need the conductor, and also to work out the balance, to have an overview and give a certain inspiration. And I think half of the work of a conductor is psychological. You have to be a very good psychologist because you are dealing with human beings. And I try to just not to get in the way. And don't talk too much. don't you think?
Absolutely, absolutely. I'll sign that. I just have maybe one or two more questions. Reading your book, it was interesting to hear whom you had as a young man as an inspiration, as a source of inspiration. I remember that Rubinstein was mentioned there. Mieczysław Horszowski was mentioned there. We both participated at the Chamber Music Festival in Marlborough, where Rudolf Serkin was such a prominent figure. Could you tell us who you were inspired by in your youth? Whether they were pianists or conductors, composers, could you tell us a few words about that, please?
Many names come to mind. Pianists, but not necessarily pianists. For example, really, Pablo Casals, whom I didn't see live, I am so sorry. My wife still played in Marlborough under Casals. But he's an idol for me as a musician, also as a human being, when he had the courage, to stand up against Franco. I admire that very much. Bartók, of course, again, before my time. Then I heard some really great pianists. Yes, Richter was very important, especially when he was younger. He was volcanic. I remember this concert. I was sitting on my mother's lap, and I was maybe 7. I never forget that. And there was a wonderful, wonderful Hungarian pianist, Annie Fischer. She was really like a queen to me. I heard her so many times, then we became very good friends. And not necessarily pianists, composers, conductors. Rafael Kubelik, the great Czech conductor, was a close friend. And through him I discovered the music of Janáček. That was a big discovery.
Thank you. I'd like to also ask you about the festivals which you have either founded or still lead. I'm talking about Mondsee Festival close to Salzburg on the beautiful lake of Mondsee. I also think of Itingen in Switzerland, which you co-led together with our dear friend and esteemed colleague Heinz Holliger, and the Omaggio a Palladio in Vicenza in Italy. So what does a festival offer compared to such a concert in a subscription series? What can be realized, what can be created in that frame?
There are probably too many festivals today. There's an overexposure, but as the word suggests, festive, it's a feast. It's not every day. So I think a festival has to have a raison d'être, why it is there. So it has to be in a place which is inspiring, a beautiful place. It has to have a very good concert venue. And so it can attract people to come there away from work, away from everyday stress, and to concentrate on music and art, and maybe combine it with nature and take wonderful excursions. There are some festivals which overdo it, in my modest opinion. Like you come to the Salzburg Festival and there are 10 events parallel. I mean, there is something in the morning, something in the afternoon, and some people go to everything. So by 5 o'clock in the afternoon, they don't remember what they heard in the morning. So in my festivals, I try to do it just one thing a day, and the people should concentrate on that. But so away from the routine, and to have a circle of friends, musical friends, that you like to to be together with, to share this experience. And also in these festivals, I enjoy making programs. Making programs is like cooking, cooking a meal and what you want to put together. And that is very enjoyable.
Thank you. And finally, just one last question. You have created amazing things. We mentioned the orchestra, the festivals, your numerous recordings. You are a talented writer. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, like Schumann, like Bartók, very articulate with your pen as well as your playing. What are your plans, or what do you wish for the near future? What are your plans? What would you like to do more of?
I have no plans. Look, I'm now over 70. I'm full of gratitude. I have been very lucky in my life. And it's very, for example, my dear orchestra, the Capella, I decided I stop it next year because it's like a family and it's very personal. So we are getting not younger. So I cannot tell a musician that you are now too old and I take a young one. So I better stop, and to stop at the right time.
It was certainly a feast for us today, and thank you for sharing this wonderful music and poetry. And please come again soon to Croatia. Thank you.
Thank you.